First of all, many thanks to zetkin.forum and everyone working to make this conference happen. I'm very happy to be here. You know, in Italy, we always listen in the newspaper and the TV shows about German locomotive. And it's very important for our economy that this German locomotive goes on and on. And I hope that this locomotive will also restart in terms of connection, struggles, organization, because Europe needs you and Italy needs you. So France with Mélenchon, it's not enough to our battle in Europe. And I'm here to talk about the Italian situation, both as a researcher and as a political activist. I believe it's important to talk about Italy, not only because it's the first major European country where a far-right party has taken power, but also because Italy has often been a political laboratory. We can think about fascism itself, but we can also think about Berlusconi. Now we see with Trump some similarity. Or we can think about five-star movements that anticipated some populist movements in Europe. So understanding what's happening in Italy may help to identify some broader tendencies in Europe, giving maybe to our popular forces the tools to anticipate enemies' move and build some effective strategies, and above all, to you to avoid our mistakes in Italy. Now, I've often noticed that outside of Italy, there's a lot of confusion about what's going on in Italy. Some think that Meloni is an anti-system figure who came to power through a strong popular wave, that her party rose from 1% to 27% with working class support, that there is a numerical rise in fascist group, and finally that Meloni is enacting policies that are typically fascist. And for me, for us, for a lot of comrades in Italy, that is not the case. But it's important to understand in what sense this is not the case, because as you will see, my presentation is not about diminishing the seriousness of the Meloni government. On the contrary, it's about seeing Meloni as a part of much deeper trend, one that began before Meloni and will continue after her. Because this trend is not about a single leader or a party. It has to do with the needs of Italian capital, with a broader social bloc and its ideological structure, and with international pressures to which Italy, more than other countries, is highly sensitive. So in my talk today, I will try to first offer a realistic, I will try to offer a realistic view of the far right in Italy and Meloni government. Second, I will try to show how this visible fascism, visible elements of fascism under Meloni emerge from a deeper layer of what we can call invisible fascism, that is a long-standing continuity in Italian society, a reactionary bloc broader than the right wing currently in power. This structure adapts to historical shifts, but its role remains always the same, that is, to prevent changes and to keep Italian bourgeoisie tied to the dominant imperialist powers. To achieve this goal, this reactionary bloc seeks to depoliticize the masses and push them into the private sphere. And then this we'll see, it's most important in Italy now. This reactionary bloc also promotes a strong anti-communist ideology, and here anti-communism is not just about communism as we can intend it or understand it, but it's about anything related to collective life, even the state as a basic rule of law. There's a kind of, the right wing in Italy cannot even, stand the state in this sense. For Berlusconi, everyone was a communist. Above all, people asking, for taxes to him. So finally, this reactionary bloc tries to establish corporatism in all areas of social life, from schools to workplaces. So this was to explain this very long title, but in the conclusion, I'll try to offer some ideas and some experiences on how we might fight back against this form of fascism. So let's start with the first point, and let's go straight to the point. Is there really fascism in Italy today? Of course, it depends on what we mean by fascism and what aspect we focus on. It's a very big category used in a lot of ways. And we need to be careful because the Marxist reading of fascism is very different from the liberal one, which mostly focuses on superstructural features like the political culture or a leader of a party. From this point of view, one might say that Italy is fascist because Meloni and members of the party are big fans of Mussolini, which is completely true. I mean, they're really fun. Or because her government focuses on security, empowers the police, attacks social movements, all sign of an authoritarian, if not outright fascist approach. And of course, there's some truth also in this. But let's take a Marxist perspective. The analysis of fascism developed by Gramsci, and I want to quote also another very important intellectual in Italy, but not so well known abroad, Franco Fortini, who tries to make some reflection of Gramsci updated to the situation of Italy in the 60s and in the 70s, may be helpful here. Because if we look at historical fascism, its features were, I just give some bullet points because we can talk for a long time about this. First, fascism was big capital's response to a huge social mobilization and the communist threat in Italy and in Germany too, imitating socialist forms but redirecting popular discontent elsewhere. Two, it relied on squad violence, systematic attacks from below on all left-wing spaces and movements. Third point, it crushed opposition and press freedom, imagining a political organization of the masses that was neither liberal democracy with parliament nor socialism with Soviets, but corporatism, which Mussolini himself called in the Dictionary of Fascism, where, of course, Mussolini wrote the fascist voice, corporatism is the essence of fascism. 4 point, in foreign policy, it aimed for autonomous imperialist projection, the attempt of Italy to have an empire, developing an ideology of superiority, not just over colonized people, but over everyone, maybe except German people. 5 point, and I stop here, economically, it involved state intervention to modernize the country, pursuing sovereignty in key sectors like agriculture, for example. So let's take a look on what is the situation today and what really Meloni's government does. First point, there has hasn't been any significant social mobilization during last years, during 15 years, I would say. Class conflicts, of course, still exist, but it's local and very sectoral. There are no successful left-wing forms or symbols for the right to imitate. And since the 90s, big Italian capital has mostly baked center-left, or what we call in Italy technical governments, like that one of Mario Monti or Mario Draghi once. These governments carried out key neoliberal reforms in labor, pensions, constitution, and privatization. All these reforms were made in Italy by center-left or by technical governments who were baked both center-left and center-right. So, second point, there's no significant squad activity in Italy. Sometimes I meet some comrades like, you are living in a very terrific situation. I say, of course we have fascism. We always had fascism in Italy. We always had confrontation with fascist people. But really, in this moment, we know this group. And paradoxically, in this moment of their greatest electoral success, the far-right activist base is at its historical low. All fascist groups are in crisis. They can recruit youth. They don't speak to the youth. Youth doesn't listen to them. And they have retreated into a cultural or identity-focused position. Italian society as a whole is demobilized, even in a fascist way. Third point, Meloni's far-right doesn't propose any real mass participation. In fact, part of the success of her coalition lies in offering a message of calm and disengagement to a tired, frightened country exhausted by 10 years of struggles and populist speech in the television. The right says, the left wants to mobilize you, to change you. The left wants that you are different, but you just stay focused on your family, keep going as you are, don't mind, trust in us, we will do something good for you. So, 4 point, it's completely different from the speech, the rhetoric of Mussolini, who were talking about a fascist revolution. There was an attempt to mobilize mass in order to justify and legitimate his power. 4 point, there's no autonomous, this is a very important point, there's no autonomous nationalist or imperialistic agenda in Italy. Autonomous imperialistic agenda. Suprematism is only directed from the top to the bottom against migrants, of course, African people, black people, while there is a strong intellectual subordination to more developed country. In fact, we don't think about ourselves as an imperialist country. 5 point, finally, in economic terms, there's no redistributive state intervention. The state acts to protect property owners and fund private actors. There's no long-term vision. The economy remains, and is intended to remain, deeply integrated into the global trend and our Western bloc. So, I know I'm a little schematic here, but I hope you get my point. If we apply Marxist criteria, Meloni government is not a fascist one. Yes, we see individual fascists, both in government or sometimes in the streets, attacking migrants or assaulting gay people, but there's no fascism as the capital, as we intend it, as the capital extreme solution for maintaining and expanding its power. Just a few more facts, often unknown abroad, can help to shape the situation. First of all, Meloni is not an outsider. Neither she comes from the left, like Mussolini. She entered in politics in the 90s, so after the end of socialism, when their party, the far-right party, had already moderated, adopting liberal economics, pro-American foreign policy and entering government under Berlusconi in 1994 with a 50% of vote. That was the far right, just, the day after the fall of Berlin Wall. So it's any myth, Meloni coming from nowhere. She was inside the system. In 2008, with Berlusconi, Meloni became a minister at just 31 years old. So even if she's very able to use a direct and popular language, you have to think that the leader of the opposition, Schlein, she is from a family of Swiss bankers. So she has some difficulty to speak, the language of the street. Meloni, it's very able in do this, but she's always been part of the system. I mean, her entire life has been in politics, and she quickly rose to top position in the party. In recent years, by being in opposition, she adopted some populist trends, some populist tones, but she also voted alongside the center-left in different moments during technical governments, even of the EU banker Mario Draghi. Once in power, she quickly aligned with the establishment, often denying her own past statements. Finally, we have to think about how many votes Meloni won, because and what kind of votes Meloni won, because these votes were not new. We have a system in Italy that the right always moved, the vote from of right-wing people always move between three parties. So you have Berlusconi, you have Meloni, the fascist one, and you have the North League, a kind of autonomist far-right party, okay? So first Berlusconi had the votes, then Berlusconi declined because he was old, he had a lot of problems with law, and these votes moved to Salvini. Without that, this was meaning for a more autonomist demand in the north of Italy. It was just Berlusconi is not able to do what we ask and we want him to do. So we passed to Salvini. Salvini was not able at all. It was kind of mythoman, quite exalted man. And so they moved to Meloni because it was the most, believable figure. So it's always the same votes, and it's not so much votes. I mean, Berlusconi had a real presence in Italian society. Meloni took between 5 and 7 million voters less than Berlusconi. So it's a fragile project. So why does someone still talk about fascism in Italy? It's simple. The Italian center-left needs to create this threat to remain legitimate. Since they cannot win votes on their own platform, because center-left in Italy have a lot of different platforms and a lot of problems, and they have, above all, a lack of credibility in the eyes of the working class due to the tremendous reforms, anti-popular reforms they made in the past. So they need to define themselves, but what they are not. This has been the center-left only electoral strategy since Berlusconi. They said, fascism is coming, so vote for us to stop it. So for 30 years now, we've been told that fascism is about to return, to come back in Italy. So I don't know, but it seems to me that fascism in Italy, it's like our trains, we are expecting them for a long period, but they never are punctual. And this strategy doesn't work very well. It has succeeded in one thing that was important for a liberal part of our country, making the communists disappear from the political scene. Even after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Italy still had a strong communist presence in the society. But in the various appeal to unity and tactical voting, the ones forced to move toward the center were always the most radical forces. Most radical forces had to renounce to their identity because a system of vote that needs you to go toward the center. So the centrist strategy, now proposed, for instance, to the France Insoumise, was already used in Italy to destroy the alternative left. And I'm very happy, I know France Insoumise quite well, and I'm very happy they are not, giving to the center this card to play. Today, that field is mostly reduced, the field of the communists is mostly reduced to little groups that lacks autonomy and must align with center-left in order to survive. So after election, if center-left wins, it implements anti-popular reforms. If it loses, it seeks deal with far-right because we have to have an institutional dialogue. So can you understand how this trap of visible fascism works in Italy? So let's come to the second part. As Gestalt psychology, I know we are in German, so you know something about Gestalt psychology, and a very famous philosopher, French philosopher, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, have reminded us the visible and invisible are in a kind of dialectical relationship. The visible is what comes to the foreground and catches our attention. But to understand it, to understand what is it, we need to look at the background that produces, supports, and shapes this visible in time. So we must first take a look at some structural features of Italian society and what they imply politically. I will be very quick on this part. But first of all, over the past 20 years, Italy is maybe the only country in Europe that had the lowest growth rates in Europe and has faced three major crises. 2008, like everyone, 2011, like Greece and Spain, and 2020. So this has made our country the second most indebted country in the Eurozone. Second, at the same time, Italy is one of the countries with the highest level of private wealth in the world. We are third in Europe, more than Germany. This wealth is less polarized than in other countries because wide segments of the middle class and even of the working class between 60s and 90s benefit from wages and services that allowed them to buy homes, accumulate savings, which are now being passed to the next generation. This is very important, and I'll show you why. Third point, public debt and private wealth are also tied to massive tax evasion, around 180 billion euros per year. This is linked to the high number of self-employed workers. In Italy, they are almost 20% of the workforce. In Germany, we are at 7% of the workforce. And the small size of business, just to give you an example, in Italy, we have an average of 4 employees per company. In Germany, we have 12 employees per company. It's an average, of course. So add to these the presence of clientelist and mafia networks still operating, even not like you see in the movie. They don't need to fire, because if you fire, you catch attention, of course. So they are operating in economy now with a mass of capitals that before were hidden. Well, this put politics in a lot of corruption, and the right made a lot of agreement with these sections. So finally, Italy is the only European country where wages have stagnated for the past 30 years, in partly due to deindustrialization, partly due to union policies of moderation, especially during center-left governments, and partly because small and medium-sized business have been allowed to ignore labor contracts in order to survive to the crisis. So what does this produce? I'm giving you some structural point in order to understand what is invisible fascism and why Meloni, it's not Meloni itself that is dangerous, but it's all the reactionary bloc that is broader than Meloni, that is dangerous. And so we have to develop a strategy. First, all this situation gives enormous weight to the petty bourgeoisie. Workers are employed in small, non-innovative companies with weak union presence. They are closely subjected to the economic and even moral pressures of their bosses. Even in larger companies where unions exist, they often been co-opted and made corporatist. As a result, workers often rely on family savings to survive. The same is true for middle-class metropolitan youth. A perverse link is created not only with employers, but also with families. I could say, like a joke, we love our moms, but I can assure you our love, it's not only about love. I mean, Italian youth needs the family in order to survive because our salaries are too low. Thus, unwilling to accept this situation, emigrate, of course. We have a lot, around 1 million young Italians migrated and left the country since the 2008 crisis. Most of those leaving are the most educated or the most dynamic individuals, that one that wants to change the situation. Meanwhile, migrants who arrive in Italy, they are not integrated, but exploited. And so this makes it impossible for Italy to grow, even in a demographic sense. I mean, everyone knows about the difficult Italy is the country that where the demographic crisis is the biggest in Europe. So, and we are the second oldest country in the world. So now you can put together all the pieces. All this leads to great passivity, withdrawal from public life, and low levels of conflict. And this explains not only the disappearance of the left, but also why it's so hard for the left, for a true left, to re-emerge. Pay attention here. This social structure is not only the result of capitalism acting on Italian society, it's also a deliberate political construction. In the mid-70s, it was reinforced to build a kind of buffer of petty bourgeoisie around the proletarian force in order to avoid a revolution in Italy. And in the early 90s, it was used to prevent leftist demand from reaching government. So all of these make very difficult in some struggles to go on. For this, a fascist dictatorship in this moment isn't needed. All it takes is further intensifying the authoritarian elements of neoliberalism. Here we see the bet of Meloni. Meloni has to prevent the unresolved contradictions, and in this particular contingency, economical and international political contingency, has to face with the consequences of war. So she has to avoid a return of conflict even in Italy. So we go to the conclusion, and I have some good news for you, because if not, it's so depressing. But we are seeing some kind of changing in the situation in Italy. I mean, for example, all the movements in Palestinian solidarity was huge. And today in Rome, we organized a huge demonstration against NATO. So the pressure of international situation is changing something in Italy. And more situation is changing in Italy, more Meloni is trying to prevent the conflict. So what do we have to do in Italy? Maybe if some of these speech has some points in contact with Europe, we have to do in order to take back, to fight back against the fascism. In my opinion, we have to avoid completely the alliance with the liberal force. I mean, liberal forces in Italy and fascists, they are really intertwined. So, of course, we can have some battles in defend democratic rights, but there's no condition for an anti-fascist front. Of course, at some points we do not have to be sectarian, but we just need to not being identified with liberal force. In my opinion, the problem is, for some aspect, is more challenging. The problem is that we don't have in Italy a social ground. We don't have a milieu already prepared that we have to orientate in a unified or revolutionary direction. That's the reason why sectarian or opportunist solution failed, both of them. There's no demand waiting for a response. It's the ground itself that we have to rebuild. We need to create our own public. To use a business term, we need to generate the demand for us, for the communists. That can only be done through serious social and theoretical work, and by giving ourselves a little bit of time, we must start by deeply analyze class dynamics, identifying our subject. Based on these, we need to take conflict into schools, workplaces, neighbors, where these particular sectors live. We don't have to be afraid if in this moment we cannot speak to the old public opinion, if we cannot rejoin them in this moment, but we can identify the most promising sector of class and we can verify and work on them. And closing, at the same time, we need to build networks. What we do in Italy is to build networks of mutual aid and support, because as capitalistic crises go farther, even working class that is more and more poor needs some direct response to the crisis. And the state now, the state of bourgeoisie, cannot respond to them. So we organize like hospital, schools, theater, even gyms. So we try to recover this big tradition of houses of the people. And of course, we need to build our own media, not just for ideological positioning, but to reconnect everyday experience with global processes. This is very important. People need to understand that socialism is something that is useful in your everyday life. It's not something that will come a day or just a dream. So, all of these cannot be carried out by isolated collectives, unions, or local associations. Someone has a part on it, but it must be coordinated and guided by a useful programmatic platform, one with a stable identity, with its own symbols, even with its own rituals, because for people in a period of crisis, it's important, in a period of crisis to meet other people and build a community. So this is what we're trying to do nowadays in Italy. And in short, I would say that there is no accumulation of social forces before political organization. It's because we have a general political vision that we can build this social accumulation. I mean, meaningful networks, even affective and cultural relationships. And this is what we call invisible communism. Invisible communism, and I know it may seem a very strange expression, but I want to finish up this. Wasn't this invisible communism what Marx meant when he wrote "A Spectre is Haunting Europe"? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.